one of the best ways to push our painting practice forward is simply to look at what we've painted in relationship to the actual view that we're looking at, and to have someone give you a little critique on your painting. So in this case, one of my students had painted this lovely little beach scene of a cliff that is very meaningful, a little area where I think that even might be a granddaughter. So the message I got back from him was that he felt that his little painting, little sketch was a bit too tight, that he wasn't that happy with the colours, and how could he push that forward. So if we look at the actual reference, which is here, and we can see that in fact, in reality, what we often do is we think, well, a beach sand is kind of pinkish, so I'm going to put in some pink sand. It really isn't that pink at all. It's a lovely, cool grey colour. And that would be one of the things to look at in keeping this painting a little bit more contemporary and fun looking, is to just give it colours that complement the other colours within the palette. But let's just go back a minute to composition, because in fact this student has observed really well everything that needs to be observed. There are 5 beautiful basic shapes here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe not even a 5th. Possibly some of those rocks could be a 5th. And he's observed that. And where you can just allow your own voice to come in is to just prevent yourself from putting in too much detail. And in this case, the sky, there's a lot of lovely things going on in this moody sky. And it is personal preference. He's decided to almost stab in these little marks. Now this is an iPad mock-up, so the marks are going to be different from a brush, but it just gives you an idea that if you went in with a bigger brush for your sky, for example something like that, and you did go in and you went across your sky, that you end up with some rather nice blocky marks which are different from other marks or shapes within the painting. And getting back to the idea of basic shapes, when he wanted to do his beach area here, in looking at the photo reference, if you look very carefully, you can see an opportunity to almost break it down into further flat areas. And there is a sense of depth here, because I've allowed there to be a shift in tonal variation that's a little darker in tonal value. It's the same colour, but it's a bit darker to this, and this by the same token is also a little bit lighter, and I've done that here. I've just added to his painting a little bit of that lighter feeling of sand. He's seen it here, he's observed it here beautifully, but in my earlier comment I feel that in fact the colour is a bit too representational in his own mind, that sand is pink and therefore it needs to be pink. Well, in fact it's not very pink at all, and in knocking it down to a cooler colour, i.e. with less red in it, focusing more on a grey brown, a lovely kind of derby grey, it just gives you a sense of depth with these flat areas, allowing you to move in to the picture rather than just this large shape here, which essentially is what's happened here. He's seen that there are some lovely areas of shape, but in fact there are little sub areas where just when you make a nod to where it's lighter and where it's darker, where it's lighter and where it's darker, you start to get that sense of depth. And in fact in this corner here, just here, he needs to exaggerate that little pocket of light, which I've done here, and suddenly you feel like you're entering into the painting and there's a bit more depth. Now the other thing I noticed about this image is that there's a lovely little opportunity for some repetition, and he's got some green here. Now there is green here in this lovely little brow of seaweed, but I'm not convinced that that would have been a good idea to put in, and in fact he didn't do that. To have put that in might have created a block, a visual block, so that you couldn't go out and beyond and then onto the sea. So instead of putting that in, I suggested to him that in fact he puts a little nod to a bit of the green, which in turn will then repeat or echo with the green of the cliff, and by the same token there's a little bit of I don't know whether it's marram grass or some kind of sea vegetation here in this right hand corner, that if you just do a little echo to it here, that you will also get this almost like this triangle of green chatting, which makes the composition more interesting than just one shape of green and nothing anywhere else. Because what the eye does is that it pops over to this green and it might flip over here and then it might flick down here. So that's just a little note on the repetition of colour, which can be really useful. And if we look at the rocks, which he has very beautifully rendered here in paint, and lovely attention to the light, it really is a delightful painting. But his remit is that he wants to loosen up, he wants to simplify it. And that's where, if you look at the truth of what's going on in this little photo reference, in fact he's just over-egged the darkness here in relation to the sky and the sea. It's just a little bit too pronounced, which is very easy to do, and it certainly does give drama. But in this little iPad mock-up, I decided to just cool it off, just knock it back so it's not black and it's certainly not as dark. And what it does is it just creates a little bit more harmony in relation to the cliff beside it, the sky beyond, and the sea to the left. And it's those little things that you can observe after you've taken a break. Let's say you've done a sweet little sketch like this and you take a break and then you look at it and you go, oh, do you know what? I think that's a bit too strong. I'm just going to, you could mix up a little bit of ultramarine with possibly a tiny little bit of titanium white and just the smidgenest little bit of a knocking back, and that will just quieten that area. And then suddenly in relation to the cliff face here, it's just less stark. And what happens is that your eye doesn't zoom straight into this. It kind of comes in, it acknowledges that, but then it kind of drifts off into the horizon. And that's where possibly the daydreaming might begin when you're looking at a picture like this. And other areas that I wanted to suggest to him were, in fact, if you look very carefully at this little low bit of the coastline, it's like a little low hip of coastline of grass, that there seems to be an opportunity for a little sense of pattern and light on this little tip. So just the tiniest little nod to that. And when I do these critiques, I don't like to do too much to a student's work, because firstly, they've done a great job, and secondly, you'd be surprised how little you need to do to push a painting over the finish line. So if you compare this one with this one, there's just a few little highlights just to suggest that pattern along here. And by the same token, I think I've just slightly emphasized a few little horizontal lines, which if you look carefully at that photo, there is definitely evidence of that there. So really, that's all that I have to say about this sweet little sketch that this student has done. The horizon line, one final thing to say is the relationship of the water to the rocks. And again, you know, the sea is blue, the sand is pink, let's make the sand pink, let's make the sea blue. But in fact, if you look, and I know photographs are different from reality, but the tonal value of the sea here is slightly less in certainly this photographic reference. And if I just knock it back again, make it a little lighter, which is what I have done here, and make less of a stark contrast between the sky meeting the horizon line, can you see here, and the sea, it's just a gentler shift between the two, because if you look at the photo reference, it is a gentler shift between the two. And it's those little things, when you observe them, that you will start to just see a more mellow, loose, kind of funky way of painting your view. So I hope you found that helpful, and it really is a wonderful thing to look at little paintings and just have this discussion as to how we can push them over the finish line.